Okay, so the biggest problem I have with LLMs in general is that it tends to just give you an answer and not really investigate your thinking. And this was something I explored a little bit in my previous Claude video where I talked about the resistance, which is just like a mask I put on Claude to help it investigate my thinking. And so I'll play that clip quickly, but basically it's just about the idea that you tell the AI to do something and it spits out something sort of sycophantic at you, and this is resisting that whole thing. And I didn't like that LLMs would just spit stuff at you. I wanted to ask me why and investigate my idea a little bit further. So like if I ask the resistance, or if I come to the resistance with the prompt, I feel like Nike has become a boring basketball brand. It won't like spit at me what it thinks about Nike being a boring basketball brand. It will ask me why. And then in asking me this why, it has me as the person investigate my thinking a little bit more. I don't really want AI to give me an answer because its answers tend to be general because it's trained on like a lot of general-ish things. I want an AI to like actually be able to investigate what it is I'm trying to get or gain from the interaction that I'm having with it. And so one way to do that is to, every time you prompt it, is to put a little thing in like investigate my thinking and make sure you understand the context in case my prompt isn't wrong. But that takes a while to type and it's a little bit tedious. And so I have a solution that's pretty easy, pretty elegant, so long as you use ChatGPT, Claude, which I use, Perplexity, or Gemini. So in these four softwares, which is Claude, which is what I use, ChatGPT, Gemini, or Perplexity, you're able to alter the way that the AI responds to you. And the way I like to think about it is mask. Basically, you're giving the AI a role, the AI puts on that mask and then performs that role. So in my previous video, I talked about two good examples are the resistance, which I use as a thing to push up against my thinking, and then Joseph Frank, which is sort of the one I use as a dictionary. It gives me more context into words or languages that I don't understand. And every time that I interact with Claude in one of these masks, it responds in a very specific way. And within ChatGPT, it's called instructions. Within Claude, it's called styles, although I call them masks. Within Perplexity, you'd be working in the AI profile, I believe it is. And then within Gemini, you'd be creating these little things called gems. And the general idea with these things is that you give it a set of instructions and it carries out those instructions every time you interact with it. So you don't have to paste in the sort of tedious thing of investigate my thinking, make sure you understand the context. So with Claude, I'll pull it up on the screen quickly. Basically, I created a mask, and in this mask, the specific instructions are: before you respond to any request, evaluate if the prompt provides sufficient context and clear intent. If it doesn't, prioritize clarification over assumption, ask questions. And what this does is, if I give it a really general prompt, such as create for me a reading schedule, it won't just give me a generalized thing of everything this model has been trained on that it knows about reading schedules, but it will actually ask me for more context. It'll be like, this isn't a very good prompt. I need you to provide for me more context if you actually want me to give you useful information. So I'll go through a few examples and then I'll pop back in here. Okay, so the first example is this gardening example where I say, I'm trying to get into gardening, any recommendations? And what Claude spits at me without the mask that I've talked about, it spits at me this idea of, if you want to grow plants, you should begin with herbs, you can use them in cooking, and it just gives me sort of general recommendations for somebody that's starting gardening without really asking me any questions. It gives me advice on which tools to buy, understanding my growing conditions, and trying to start small, which is nice, and like it's good and it's pretty general, and I'm sure I could start a garden from this if I really thought about it and really tried. But one of the things that I find difficult with LLMs in general is I have this tendency to sort of scan. I don't really get much out of a response like this. I feel like I just sort of scan through it and it doesn't really help me that much. And then at the end, you do kind of have questions where Claude is asking, are you thinking about container gardening, or do you have an outdoor space for an in-ground garden? What's your climate like? And then says it would help give more specific suggestions. But with the way that I've used LLMs in general, it seems to me that that's just Claude trying to continue the conversation, not actually be helpful. And like, not in an accusing way am I saying this. It's just like seems sort of the way that it performs and functions is to keep the conversation going. And I suppose my big problem with this is that it doesn't have me investigate like what it is about gardening I'm actually interested in. And so we'll get into the next example where I think the mask does a much better job of investigating that thinking. So I have a pretty similar prompt. I put on the Ask Better Question mask, and I say, I'm trying to get into gardening. Any suggestions? And you can see in the thinking it says analyzing prompts context and intent for gardening suggestions, which is sort of what the mask is meant to do. And so instead of giving me those 4 paragraphs of like generalized gardening, it asks me a series of about 12 questions about location and environment, my preferences and the experience I have with gardening, practical considerations, and then what my actual goals are. And so then what I do is I copy and paste that and put it in the chat box. I actually goof up and hit enter once. But I copy and paste it, put it in the the prompting box, and then go through answering all the questions that it had for me. And in so answering, I'm actually thinking about what it is within gardening that I can do, 1, that I'm interested in, 2, and that is, actually feasible. So now that it has all these questions, it spits out this result, and instead of asking me more questions, it feels content in understanding that it has the right amount of context, as well as just generally feels that it can answer the question well. And it goes through and gives me some recommendations based on what I put in there, which is that I wanted flowers that would grow on a fire escape, and I wanted to do it for under $50. Yeah, and then I read through it, and I'm actually thinking about buying some marigolds and sweet asylum. I might buy them all, petunias as well. We'll see. Why not? I like that it called marigolds bomb-proof. I don't know where it decided on that adjective. I'm a little bit surprised compared to the other ways of describing the floor flowers below it, and it chose bomb-proof. So in general, at least to me, the response that I get from the Ask Better Questions mask is just a lot more useful, both for me as somebody that wants to think about what I actually want from whatever I'm prompting, as well as from Claude and the response that it actually gives in being helpful to me. So it's better for my personal development, as well as just getting something that's actually useful. So the second example here is me asking Claude to tell me what you can do. And so there are 2 sort of important things here. 1, it gives me a bit of a snarky response that can hurt my feelings and, encourage me to ask better responses, or better prompts in general. And then the other thing it does is it has this little bit to provide you with genuinely useful information rather than a generic capabilities laundry list. I need you to narrow down what you're looking for. And then it gives me 4 questions to answer. And then if I go through and answer that, it will help me just better understand what it is I want to do with the tool, as well as dig into what the tool can actually do. And then if you compare that to what happens without the mask, when I say, tell me what you can do, it gives this sort of canned answer that's fairly, it lays out a lot of things that it can do, but like I said, it gives you sort of the 4 to 5 paragraph scan over style that a lot of LLMs spit out, which to me is not super useful, and unfortunately a bad habit of mine is scanning anything that looks like this now. And so it's not anything that gets me thinking about what I want Claude to do, but I'm sure that it says most of the stuff that Claude can actually do, which is not overly useful to me. And the whole point of these tools for me is to actually be useful. So I find this really useful because it allows you to interact with the AI in a way that's actually useful and isn't reliant on you giving a bunch of information about yourself, and allows for one-off interactions that actually help the artificial intelligence understand the context of the situation better without memory or personalization. And the other thing that's really nice about it is it prevents you from losing sort of things that make you a little bit human, such as thinking for yourself and investigating your own thinking, which I really value. And so within this, you're not going to just get responses in the same way that if AI fully understood your personal context, you gave it all the information about you ever, and then it fully understood your personal context and then just answered things for you or created workout plans for you when you gave it just a general prompt. What this does is it forces you to get better at prompting, better at thinking about how these tools actually work and how you interact with them and what good instructions actually are, as well as investigating your own thinking, which I think is good rather than offloading the humanity. If you play around with it, good luck. It's nice. It should be useful. That's the goal. Hopefully this is useful. Have a good day.